Have you ever wondered what would happen if you were truly alone, cut off from help, swallowed by wilderness so vast it doesn't even notice your fear? Have you ever thought about how thin the line is between safety and darkness when there's no one coming, no signal, no witnesses? Out there, beyond the roads and lights, rules aren't suggestions. They're the only thing standing between you and something that knows how you think. If you've ever felt the weight of isolation, the way fear grows louder when the world goes quiet, then you already understand more than you think. Before we begin, if stories about survival, hidden threats, and the cost of curiosity matter to you, leave a comment, subscribe, or share this. Because some warnings only work if they're heard by enough people. My name is Daniel J. Kallik, and I'm a state trooper with the Alaska State Troopers, assigned to Western Interior Rural Patrol. I've worn this badge for 17 years, most of them spent flying into places that don't have roads, policing distances measured in fuel hours instead of miles. My jurisdiction covers river valleys and mountain basins west of the Kuskokwim, villages you can't pronounce unless you grew up here, and stretches of wilderness so empty they don't show up as anything but green on a map. People think the rules we enforce out there are about bears, weather, or getting lost. That's the story we tell new troopers, anyway. It's not wrong, but it's incomplete. The truth is, some rules exist because something else does. Something that isn't wildlife, isn't human, and doesn't care about our intentions. It cares about our habits. I learned that lesson my first winter assignment, and it cost a man named Eli Savunga, 2011, along the Aniak River tributary, North Fork, just past a gravel bar everyone calls Fisher's Bend. Eli was a volunteer search and rescue pilot, bush smart and careful. He broke one rule, one we don't write down, because he heard a voice on the radio that sounded like his daughter. They never found enough of him to close the casket. That was the first time the rules failed. Or maybe the first time I understood they only slow things down. I survived that year. Others didn't. Out here, knowledge doesn't get passed in memos. It gets passed in hangars, over burnt coffee, in sentences that trail off. Don't answer after dark. If it says your name twice, don't respond. If dispatch goes quiet, you leave. These aren't official. They're inherited. On paper, I'm a law enforcement officer. In practice, I work in wilderness areas where official rules exist not to prevent accidents, but to contain something that preys on human behavior. The valley I'm talking about now doesn't have a name on most maps. Locals call it Kuyarak, which loosely translates to the place that echoes. It's a long bowl cut by glacial runoff, spruce-choked and fog-prone, with a single gravel strip used seasonally by hunters and medevac. No permanent settlement. No power. No cell coverage. We only patrol it when something goes wrong. In late September, 3 years ago, something went wrong 21 times. The first call came in at 1842, just before civil twilight dropped the temperature hard. Dispatch logged it as a lost hunter. Male voice, calm, coordinates pinged once and then vanished. Standard protocol. I was the closest trooper with air support, so I took it. Flew in with Trooper Mason Reed, 9 years on, solid, married, 2 kids back in Wasilla. Before we lifted off, the duty sergeant said something that wasn't in the checklist. If you hear anything weird on the radio, he said, not looking at me, you don't chase it. That was Rule 1. Rule 1, if a call comes from Kuyarak Valley after dusk, you verify it through dispatch twice. No exceptions. We broke that rule less than an hour later. The fog rolled in fast, like it always does there, swallowing sound. Our comms crackled, then steadied. The voice came back. Same man. Same coordinates. He said, "Trooper, I can see your lights." Mason leaned forward, scanning the tree line. "I don't see anyone," he said. Neither did I. But the voice knew details. Tail number. Mason's last name. It thanked us for coming. Compassion is a liability in that valley. We landed anyway. The gravel strip was empty. No footprints. No gear. The radio kept talking, now closer, now farther, as if pacing us. I ordered Mason back to the bird. He hesitated. That hesitation cost him later, though not that night. We logged it as a false call. Equipment malfunction. That's what the report says. What it doesn't say is that when we lifted off, the voice laughed. Not mockery. Recognition. Over the next 12 hours, calls stacked up. Different voices. Different emergencies. A woman claiming her child fell through ice, impossible, too early in the season. A medevac request using a dead nurse's call sign. Each one precise. Each one wrong. By the 17th call, the CAD system froze. Dispatch couldn't clear or log anything from Kallik. Screens locked. Audio looped. 21 calls total, all from within the same 3 square mile radius. That doesn't happen. Not without outside interference. The official explanation was a software fault triggered by atmospheric conditions. Unofficially, the old-timers stopped flying there. We set up a forward command at a weather station 20 miles out. That's when the rules got restated, quietly, like a prayer. Rule 2. Do not respond to voices you recognize unless you have visual confirmation. Rule 3. If you hear a child crying, you leave immediately. Those rules exist because of people like Lena Holt, dispatcher, 2014, who stayed on the line too long because the voice sounded like her son. Or Officer Ben Crow, Gnome Detachment, 2016, who followed his partner's voice into White Oak conditions and was found frozen, radio intact, battery full, log showing no outgoing transmissions. The thing in Kallik learned from them. The first emotionally devastating loss tied to that valley, for me, wasn't immediate. It was delayed, surgical. 2 weeks after the calls stopped, Mason's wife called me. She said he'd been sleepwalking, standing in the yard at night, answering a radio that wasn't there. He told her the valley needed him back. That he'd left something unfinished. I reported it. Quietly. Behavioral Health wrote it up as stress reaction. 3 nights later, Mason took a personal plane and flew west without filing a plan. His last transmission, picked up by a weather relay, was one sentence: "It knows your rules now." We never found the plane. That's what I mean when I say inevitability. The threat doesn't rush. It waits for compassion, for duty, for familiarity. It uses our structure against us. In Kallik, sound travels wrong. You'll hear footsteps before you make them. You'll hear your name from behind when you're alone. The spruce needles don't move when something passes through them. I went back there alone after Mason disappeared. That was another rule break, mine. Rule 4. Never enter the valley solo. I told myself it was for closure. For evidence. For his family. The truth is, I thought I could outthink it. That belief died quickly. I found his headset hanging from a branch, wire neatly coiled, like someone had taken care with it. I heard his voice then, clear as day, asking if I'd brought coffee. I answered. That was the second time compassion overrode training. Something answered back, wearing his cadence, his pauses. It thanked me for coming back. It said I was early. I left before dark. Barely. Since then, we've added more rules. They're not written. They're not enforceable. They're whispered. Rule 5. If technology behaves perfectly, assume it's lying. Rule 6. Never say your own name out loud in the valley. The database crash was fixed. Officially. Flights resumed. Cautiously. Hunters went missing again. Sporadically. Reports got thinner, language vaguer. Containment fatigue is real. Administrators want numbers, not stories. They don't like inevitability. This is my confession because I'm still alive, and because I broke rules others paid for. The valley isn't contained. It's patient. And it's learned that authority carries weight, that when a trooper speaks, people listen. That's useful to something that wants to be answered. After Mason vanished, the valley stopped calling for a while. That's the worst phase, the quiet after contact. It lulls administrators into thinking a pattern has broken, when really it's just changing shape. I stayed assigned to Western Interior, but Kuyarak became an unspoken exclusion zone. Not closed, never officially, but deprioritized. Flights routed wide. Patrols redirected unless a human life was verifiably at risk. That phrase matters. It's how the thing slips through. I tried to put distance between myself and the valley. Took assignments along the lower Kuskokwim, focused on medevacs, domestic calls, the kind of work where the danger is loud and human and ends when the cuffs go on. I told myself Mason's disappearance was a statistical inevitability in a job like ours. That if I kept my head down, followed procedure, I'd outlast it. That lasted 8 months. The call came from Tupilak, a village upriver with a population under 100. No road access, one generator, VHF radio that worked when it felt like it. I knew the caller's name before dispatch said it. Annie Chiruk, schoolteacher, widow, mid-40s. Her voice shook as she reported her nephew missing. Last seen checking fish nets near the Upper Valley. Upper Valley meant Kuyarak's edge. I asked the required questions. Time last seen. Weather. Equipment. Annie answered all of them, then said something that didn't belong in a missing person report. He answered me from the trees, she said. But it wasn't him. I felt that old tightening in my chest. What do you mean? I asked. He used my brother's voice, she said. My brother died in 2009. I logged it as stress-induced confusion. That's what the system expects. But I flagged it privately and requested air support. Before we launched, I pulled Rule 7 out of memory. One Mason had learned from an elder trooper who refused to fly west anymore. Rule 7, if the report includes recognition, names, voices, personal details, you do not bring family members to the search. Annie insisted on coming. It was her nephew. She said she knew the land, knew the river bends. Compassion pressed hard. Duty pressed harder. I broke the rule. We flew with Annie in the back, hands clenched around a rosary that didn't belong to her faith but had been her mother's. The valley greeted us with clear skies and perfect visibility, another bad sign. Technology behaved flawlessly. GPS steady. Radios crisp. Lying. We landed near the nets. No sign of struggle. Boots lined up neatly on the bank, as if someone had stepped out of them voluntarily. Annie called his name. The echo came back wrong. Too fast. Too many times. Then the voice answered. Auntie, it said, using the childhood mispronunciation. I'm cold. She took a step forward before I could stop her. The sound came from the tree line, maybe 50 yards out. I saw movement, human height, human gait, but the proportions were off, like a bad reflection. I grabbed Annie's arm. We don't go in, I said. We call it in. Her eyes filled. That's my sister's boy. I know what it costs to pull someone back from that moment. I did it anyway. She screamed his name as I dragged her toward the helicopter. The voice changed then, sharpened, lost the softness. It said my name. Full name. Badge number. I didn't answer. That was the right choice. It didn't make it easier. The boy was never found. Annie stopped speaking to me. A month later, she moved south. Officially, the case remains open. Unofficially, everyone in Tupilak knows what took him. That was devastation number 1. The valley escalated after that. Not with more calls, at least not immediately, but with precision. It started targeting infrastructure. Weather stations reporting impossible readings. GPS tracks looping back on themselves. Radios transmitting on frequencies that had been decommissioned for decades. We added Rule 8 after a tech named Harlan Pike tried to recalibrate a repeater near Kuyarak and came back wrong. Same face. Same fingerprints. But he didn't blink when you shined a light in his eyes, and he avoided mirrors. He lasted 3 days before walking into the river at dawn, humming a song no one recognized. Rule 8. If someone returns from the valley and avoids reflective surfaces, you do not let them sleep. We didn't have authority to enforce that. We tried anyway. My family felt the strain before I admitted it. My wife, Marisol, had learned not to ask about certain calls. My daughter, Elena, was 10 then, old enough to notice when I stopped using my radio at home, when I took the batteries out of toys that made noise. The thing learned their names somehow. Maybe it always knew. Maybe it listens farther than we think. The first time it used Elena's voice, it was through my phone. No number. Just her tone, asking if I could pick her up early. I was 300 miles away. I dropped the phone and smashed it under my boot until the screen went dark. That night, I wrote Rule 9 on a scrap of paper and burned it. Rule 9, if it reaches into your family, you do not respond alone. I didn't follow that rule later. That's on me. The second devastating loss was Trooper Jenna Morales, my partner after Mason. 12 years on, sharp, skeptical. She believed in procedures the way some people believe in prayer. We were dispatched to Kuyarak again after a medevac pilot reported seeing people standing where no one should be. We flew in daylight. We followed every rule we knew. We didn't land. We circled. The people looked like children. Barefoot. Smiling. They waved. Jenna whispered, "No." The radio crackled. Dispatch voice, calm, authoritative, told us to land. Claimed we had visual confirmation of survivors. That voice belonged to Captain Ross, our commanding officer. He was in Anchorage that day. I knew that. Jenna knew that. Duty is a heavy chain. Jenna unclipped hers, she banked away. The voice screamed her name then, dropped the pretense. Something struck the tail rotor, nothing visible, just force. We spun. Hard landing. Jenna broke her neck on impact. I crawled out with a concussion and a leg full of glass. I lay there until dark, following Rule 3 to the letter when the crying started. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I listened to it use Jenna's voice, then Mason's, then Elena's. I survived because I was already broken. They recovered Jenna's body the next morning. Official report: mechanical failure compounded by pilot error. Her kids got a folded flag. I got another rule carved into my bones. Rule 10: the valley will force you to choose who you are willing to abandon. The third devastation hasn't finished unfolding yet. It involves my daughter, and I won't pretend otherwise. After Jenna, I was reassigned to desk duty. Temporary, they said. For your health. Administration wanted distance between me and the valley, not because it was dangerous, but because I talked about it wrong. I used words like intentional and adaptive. Those make people uncomfortable. Containment shifted to denial. That's when the calls started again. Not to dispatch. To homes. Troopers reported phones ringing at night, showing family contacts that shouldn't have access. Villagers heard knocking where no one stood. Children reported teachers calling from empty classrooms. 21 calls was just the opening move. I'm still employed. I still wear the badge. I still follow the rules when I can. But understand this, the valley is no longer isolated. It learned our systems, our hierarchies, our loves. It doesn't need to pull you into the wilderness anymore. It can reach you where you sleep. And it waits for the moment you believe the voice might be real. Desk duty is a slow suffocation for someone used to distance and weather and noise. They put me in a windowless office in Bethel, reviewing incident reports and training briefs, pretending paper could hold back what airframes and radios couldn't. My access was quietly reduced. I couldn't authorize flights. Couldn't pull raw dispatch audio. Couldn't even log into the legacy database without a supervisor present. That was institutional denial taking shape. They didn't fire me. That would have meant acknowledging something was wrong. Instead, they isolated me, hoping time would sand down the edges of what I knew. It didn't work. The valley adapted again. It stopped reaching for authority and started reaching for routine. The calls to homes followed patterns, always during transitional hours. Dawn, dusk, school dismissal, shift change. Moments when attention is split and compassion is automatic. I started keeping my own ledger. Names, dates, voices used, outcomes. It wasn't official. It wasn't safe. But it was all I had left. That's when I noticed something that chilled me more than any single incident. The voices were getting better. Early on, the mimicry had flaws, wrong cadence, misplaced idioms, emotional tone lagging half a second behind content. By the third month, those flaws were gone. It wasn't just copying voices anymore. It was modeling relationships, anticipating responses, steering conversations, learning. Rule 11 came from an old bush constable named Peter Arluke, retired, liver shot, memory sharp as a trapjaw. If it asks you a question, he said, staring into his mug, it already knows the answer. The question is for you. Rule 11. Never answer questions in the valley. Statements only. Fewer words the better. That rule saved one trooper and cost another. The cost came first. Trooper Kyle Merritt, fresh transfer, ignored a call protocol because the voice on the line sounded like his fiancée. He kept answering questions. Where he was. When he'd be home. Whether he still loved her. They found him 3 days later in a snow machine shed outside his post, radio MIC frozen to his lips, battery dead, face peaceful. Cause of death listed as hypothermia. No mention of why the shed door was open or why his boots were placed neatly beside him. After that, training changed. Not officially. But the whispers got louder. The rules spread faster. Fear is an efficient courier. At home, Marisol started locking the bedroom door at night. Elena slept with a nightlight again. I disconnected the landline. We stopped answering unknown numbers. I taught Elena a code phrase, something only we would know, that she had to say if she ever called me from somewhere else. That was my attempt at control. The thing waited. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at the office. My personal cell buzzed. Unknown number. I didn't answer. It buzzed again. Voicemail notification chimed immediately. No delay. I shouldn't have listened. I know that now. Elena got sick at school, my wife's voice said. Tight with worry. They can't reach you. Please call me. The voice was perfect. Stress where stress should be. The slight hitch Marisol gets when she's afraid. Background noise. Children. An intercom chime. I broke Rule 11 without even standing up. I called back. The line rang once. Then Elena answered. Crying. Papa, they won't let me leave. I stood so fast my chair went over. I grabbed my jacket, keys, badge. Told my supervisor I had a family emergency. He waved me off without looking up. I didn't verify. I didn't check with the school. I didn't call Marisol on another line. Rule 12 exists because of what happened next. Rule 12, if it uses your child's voice, you stop and confirm reality before you move. I drove like the roads didn't matter. Bethel traffic blurred. I kept the phone on speaker. Elena kept talking, saying things that made sense, complaining about a substitute teacher, mentioning a spelling test she'd told me about that morning. By the time I pulled into the school parking lot, my hands were shaking. The building was locked. Quiet. Too quiet. My phone buzzed again. Same number. This time Marisol's voice was screaming my name. I finally did the right thing. Too late. I called her real number. She answered immediately. Calm. Confused. Elena was at home. Sitting at the table doing homework. I dropped the phone. Inside the school, something moved. Not fast. Not hiding. Like it knew it didn't need to. The front doors opened on their own. I didn't go in. That choice is the only reason Elena is still alive. It doesn't feel like a victory. It feels like a debt I can never repay. After that, I reported everything. The call. The voices. The manipulation. I didn't soften it. I didn't hedge. I told them the valley was no longer geographically contained and that families were being targeted as leverage. The response was administrative pressure dressed up as concern. Mandatory counseling. Fitness for duty evaluations. Suggestions that I take extended leave. They were afraid of panic. Afraid of liability. Afraid of admitting that a threat existed which couldn't be arrested, negotiated with, or explained. Containment shifted again, from field operations to information control. The third major set piece happened 2 weeks later, during what was supposed to be a routine weather relay repair. I wasn't authorized to go. I went anyway. Trooper Samir Patel and Officer Ruth Yanez were already en route, unaware that their dispatch orders had been altered mid-flight. I intercepted them on a private frequency and told them to turn back. Ruth recognized my voice. Trusted it. Samir hesitated. He asked why. I violated Rule 11 again. I answered his question. That hesitation gave the valley an opening. The weather closed in unnaturally fast. Whiteout in minutes. Samir's instruments went dead except for one, altitude, reading steady when it shouldn't. Ruth started hearing her mother's voice over the intercom, scolding her in Spanish. I told them to climb. To ignore everything they heard. The voice on their radio, using my cadence now, told them to descend. They didn't make it out. The crash site was found days later. No bodies. Just gear laid out in careful rows, like offerings. That loss sits on my chest every morning. After that, I stopped waiting for permission. I started passing rules directly. Quietly. One-on-one. Troopers. Dispatchers. Pilots. Anyone who would listen. The rules list grew longer, heavier. Rule 13. Never trust silence. It means you're being watched. Rule 14. If two rules conflict, choose the one that keeps you stationary. Rule 15. Do not return to retrieve equipment left behind. We began to see signs of spread. Similar incidents reported near the Brooks Range. Then along the Yukon. Different valleys. Same behaviors. Same escalation curve. Different names. Old reports surfaced. Russian fur traders. Missionary journals. Indigenous stories translated badly, stripped of warnings and reduced to folklore. The thing wasn't new. It was just better fed. By the time administration acknowledged a pattern anomaly, it was already too late. Enforcement fatigue set in. People got sloppy. People wanted their lives back. That's what it counts on. I still hear voices sometimes. Not out loud. In memory. Mason asking if I brought coffee. Jenna telling me to bank left. Elena crying. I don't answer them anymore. But I know someone else will. Because the rules are heavy. Because compassion is reflex. Because duty doesn't shut off when the sun goes down. And because eventually, someone will believe the voice might be real. By the time the pattern anomaly became an agenda item instead of a footnote, it had already outgrown the word anomaly. The maps told the story even when the reports wouldn't. Pins spreading outward from Kuyarak like a slow infection. Valleys, rivers, stretches of tundra with no shared infrastructure except us. Law enforcement. We were the connective tissue. Radios. Call signs. Protocols. The thing wasn't just hunting people anymore. It was hunting systems. They pulled me into a closed-door briefing in Anchorage. No windows. No phones allowed. 7 people at the table. Command staff, IT. One behavioral analyst flown in from out of state who kept using the word phenomenological like it was a shield. I laid the rules out anyway. Every one of them. I told them which ones were written in blood and which ones were still theoretical. They listened politely. Then they asked how we could operationalize the response without alarming the public. That was the moment I understood something fundamental had shifted. Containment was no longer the priority. Perception was. They wanted talking points. Language filters. A standardized explanation for anomalous calls that wouldn't undermine confidence in emergency services. They wanted to preserve trust in the system, even if the system was the attack surface. I asked them a simple question. What happens when it uses a trooper's voice to redirect a medevac? No one answered. After that meeting, my access dropped again. Badge still worked. Credentials still valid. But doors opened slower. Screens took longer to load. I was being ghosted inside my own agency. That night, the Valley engineered something new. Not a call. A visit. It was just after midnight when the knocking started. 3 sharp raps on the front door. Not loud. Not aggressive. Polite. Marisol woke first. I was already sitting up, heart racing. Elena's door was closed. Nightlight on. I listened. No footsteps. No wind. Just the knock. Then my own voice spoke from the other side of the door. Police, it said. We need to talk. Marisol looked at me like I'd split in two. I put my hand on her arm and shook my head. Rule 16 crystallized in that moment. Rule 16. Authority can be mimicked. Verification cannot. I called 911 from my cell, staying silent on the line. Told the dispatcher my address and said there was an impersonation in progress. I did not open the door. The voice outside adjusted. Dropped the uniform tone. Became tired. Familiar. Danny, it said, using a nickname only one person ever had. My father's voice. He died in 1998. Heart attack. Gnome. Marisol covered her mouth. The knocking stopped. The handle turned slightly, not enough to open, just enough to test. I did not move. After 3 minutes, it left. No sound of footsteps. No car. Just absence. The responding patrol arrived 12 minutes later. They found nothing. No prints. No disturbance. The report says false alarm. Elena didn't sleep alone for a week. That was devastation number 3, even though no one died. Not all losses leave bodies. The thing had crossed a line. Not geographic. Domestic. I sent Marisol and Elena south to stay with her sister. I didn't tell them everything. I told them enough. That's another kind of rule violation. Choosing what truth to withhold from the people you love. I stayed. If the Valley wanted authority, I'd deny it the leverage of my family. The set piece that followed was the most coordinated event I've ever seen, and it didn't happen in the Valley at all. It happened during a multi-agency wildfire evacuation outside Galena. Late summer. Dry lightning. Smoke thick enough to ground aircraft intermittently. Dozens of responders rotating through, state troopers, National Guard, volunteer fire crews. Radios overlapping. Stress high. Perfect conditions. At 1913, a call went out rerouting evac buses to an alternate staging area along the river. The voice issuing the order matched the incident commander exactly. Call sign correct. Encryption valid. 2 buses followed the instruction. I was monitoring from Bethel, unauthorized but still connected through an old access tunnel IT hadn't closed yet. I heard the order and felt the wrongness immediately. The river staging area didn't exist. I tried to countermand the order. My voice was overridden. The system rejected my credentials. Then another voice came on the channel. Mine. Clear. Calm. Authoritative. Disregard previous, it said. Proceed as instructed. That was escalation. Tactical. Systemic. I broke every chain of command I had left. I called troopers directly on personal numbers. I called drivers. I shouted into the radio knowing it wouldn't matter. One bus turned back. The other didn't. They found it burned out 2 miles downriver, nose angled toward the water. No bodies inside. No signs of panic. Personal belongings stacked neatly on the seats. The official explanation was rerouting confusion compounded by smoke and stress. I knew better. So did the trooper who found a child's shoe placed on the driver's seat, laces tied in a bow. After that, I stopped pretending I could work within the system. I went to the elders. Not as a trooper. As a man who had failed to keep people safe. In villages along the Kuskokwim and Yukon, I sat in kitchens and listened. I didn't record. I didn't interrupt. I learned names the thing had worn before we had radios to give it voices. Some called it a walker between. Some called it a caller in the dark. One elder said it was what happens when land remembers too much. None of them believed it could be stopped. Only slowed. Distracted. Misled. The rules they gave me overlapped with ours in uncomfortable ways. Don't follow voices into fog. Don't answer questions asked at the wrong time. Don't assume the dead stay dead if called correctly. They also gave me a rule I hadn't heard before. Rule 17, if it offers help, refuse it. Help always costs more later. That rule cost dispatcher Alana Cho her career. She was on overnight when a call came in from a trooper pinned by weather near the Brooks Range. His voice was strained. Coordinates checked out. Alana broke protocol and stayed on the line, guiding him through a landing using visual cues he shouldn't have been able to see. The trooper landed safely. Alana smiled. She thought she'd beaten it. 3 hours later, the same trooper called back. Calm. Thanking her. Asking questions about her schedule. Her drive home. Whether she ever took the long road by the river. She resigned a week later. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop answering phones that weren't ringing. Survival isn't always physical. By then, the rules list was too long to remember under stress. Too heavy to carry without dropping something important. That's another way it wins. I started prioritizing. 3 rules above all others. Don't move. Don't answer. Don't follow. Everything else was secondary. Administration finally acted, not to confront the threat, but to quarantine the narrative. Non-disclosure agreements. Media blackouts. Internal advisories stripped of context. The public never heard about the buses. Or the knock at my door. Or the way voices were starting to overlap, using 2 at once, harmonizing. I hear them sometimes in recordings I shouldn't still have access to. Old dispatch tapes. You can hear it testing boundaries. Switching voices mid-sentence. Laughing quietly when no one responds. It's learning patience. And I'm running out of people willing to listen. After Galena, I stopped being invited to meetings. That's how you know you've crossed from asset to liability. I still had a badge. Still had a paycheck. But my name stopped appearing on distribution lists. When I walked into a room, conversations softened or ended. Institutional denial doesn't look like refusal. It looks like patience. Like waiting for the problem to retire, transfer, or break. The Valley took advantage of that pause. It began coordinating. Not just mimicking individual authority figures, but chaining them. Dispatch voice handing off to trooper voice handing off to supervisor voice. Each one clean, each one plausible. It learned our escalation ladders and climbed them faster than we could. The rules slowed it. They did not confuse it anymore. I was driving back from Bethel late one night, snow starting early that year, when I heard the emergency tone on my radio. I shouldn't have. I'd turned it off. Battery removed. That's what I thought. The tone came anyway. Not through the speaker. Through the cab itself, vibrating the dash like a memory. Then Jenna's voice said, "Danny, You need to pull over. I did not. That restraint took everything I had. The voice shifted. Became Mason. Casual. You missed a turn. I kept driving until the road ended and the river opened up, black and slow under thin ice. I sat there for an hour, engine off, hands shaking, repeating Rule 11 like a mantra. Statements only. Fewer words the better. I am not moving, I said out loud. I am not answering. The radio went dead. The silence that followed felt considered. The next morning, I was served with papers. Administrative leave. Mandatory. Indefinite. No accusation. No incident cited. Just concerns regarding judgment under stress. They took my credentials. My access. My weapon. They didn't take my knowledge. That was their mistake. With Marisol and Elena still south, the house felt hollow. I slept on the couch. Kept lights on. I started cataloging everything, rules, incidents, names, into a physical notebook. No cloud. No electronics. Pencil only. Rule 18. Do not store knowledge digitally if you don't want it to speak back. That rule came from a dispatcher who swore her old training files started playing audio on their own. Voices layered under the text-to-speech. Whispering. The thing wanted permanence. Records. Authority preserved. I denied it that too. The fourth devastating event unfolded slowly, which somehow made it worse. Marisol called me one evening, voice strained. Elena had started talking to someone at night. Not imaginary friend talking. Conversations. Pauses. Responses. She says it's you, Marisol said. She says you call every night and help her with her breathing. I felt something inside me give way. I knew immediately what was happening. I also knew what Rule 9 demanded. Do not respond alone. I booked the first flight south. That was the violation that almost ended everything. The airport announcement system said my name when I arrived. Welcomed me back. The gate agent smiled too long. Used my badge number in casual conversation. On the plane, the woman next to me slept with her mouth open and whispered my daughter's name in her dreams. By the time we landed, I was convinced that if I went to Marisol's sister's house, something would follow me in. So I didn't. I checked into a motel instead and called Marisol from the parking lot. Do not let Elena answer the phone, I said. Do not let her open the door for anyone. Not even me. Not unless I say the phrase. The phrase was nonsense. A string of words Elena had laughed at when we made it up. Something no one else would know. Marisol agreed. She was scared. I could hear it in the way she kept saying my name, like grounding herself. That night, the motel phone rang. I didn't answer. My cell rang. I didn't answer. Then someone knocked on my door. 3 sharp raps. I sat on the bed, notebook in my lap, and waited. Papa. Elena's voice said through the door. You forgot the phrase. That almost broke me. I pressed my forehead into my hands and stayed silent. The voice changed. Became angry. Became many voices at once, overlapping, arguing about what would work. Finally, it left. The next morning, Marisol told me Elena had slept through the night for the first time in weeks. No calls. No voices. Distance mattered. Proximity was leverage. That realization came too late for Trooper Isaac Bloom. Isaac was young. Earnest. He believed rules were tools, not boundaries. He was assigned to a new patrol zone north of Fairbanks. No known incidents yet, but close enough to the spread to warrant caution. He called me unofficially, asking about the rumors. I told him what I could. I emphasized the 3 priorities. Don't move. Don't answer. Don't follow. He listened. Then his sister went missing. She was hiking a popular trail. Daylight. Other people around. She called him from the trailhead, said she was lost. Said she could hear him calling her. He broke every rule. They found his truck parked neatly at the trail entrance. Engine cold. Keys on the dash. His radio clipped to the seat, still powered, still transmitting static. The search lasted a week. No bodies. No evidence of struggle. Just absence. Isaac's case forced something new. Public pressure. 2 disappearances too close together. Families demanding answers. Media asking questions administrators couldn't deflect with weather reports. The official narrative shifted again, from denial to minimization. They called it a series of unrelated stress-induced incidents exacerbated by environmental conditions. I was asked, formally this time, to stop contacting active personnel. They were afraid knowledge itself was contagious. The valley didn't care. It escalated to children next. Not disappearances. Not at first. Dreams. Schools reported kids describing the same man in their sleep. Same voice. Same promises. He told them their parents were tired. That he could help. That rules were for adults who didn't understand. That was a line even administration couldn't ignore. A task force was formed. Quietly. Off the books. They brought me in as a consultant. Not officially. No paperwork. Just a handshake and an understanding that nothing said in that room would ever be acknowledged. I laid out the inevitable truth. The rules are failing, I said. Not because they're wrong, but because they depend on people behaving against instinct forever. Someone will break. Someone always does. They asked if there was a way to end it. I told them no. Only to slow it. Only to choose where it feeds. That's when they asked the question I'd been dreading. What if we let it take someone on our terms? I didn't answer right away. Because I understood the logic. A controlled loss. A distraction. Something to buy time. That's how you know containment has failed. Not when the rules stop working, but when the people enforcing them start thinking in sacrifices. I told them I wouldn't be part of that. They nodded. Smiled. Thanked me for my service. 2 weeks later, a controlled burn exercise was scheduled in a remote valley with a skeleton crew. The radio logs show a single unexpected call at dusk. I still don't know who answered. The controlled burn never happened. That's the official phrasing. Weather complications. Logistics. A decision made out of caution. The valley they'd chosen, one without a name, one that sat between 2 known clusters, went quiet instead. Too quiet. Flights rerouted. Radios disciplined into silence. The skeleton crew reassigned without explanation. Someone answered that dusk call. I know they did. Because 3 days later, a trooper I'd never met called my personal number and asked me why his captain knew his mother's maiden name. Containment didn't just fail after that. It inverted. The task force dissolved quietly. Members reassigned. Consultants thanked and released. The problem didn't go away. It just stopped being discussed in rooms with doors. The rules became liabilities. Teaching them meant admitting the threat. Admitting the threat meant panic. Panic meant lawsuits, resignations, headlines. So they chose normalization. People still go missing in Alaska. They always have. Weather. Terrain. Bad luck. Those explanations still work because they've always worked. The thing learned that too. It stopped being obvious. Stopped stacking calls. Stopped crashing systems. It learned restraint. It learned that one clean disappearance every few months draws less attention than 21 in a night. I was allowed back to work 6 months later. Different title. Different desk. No field authority. My job became risk liaison, which is a way of saying I review reports and suggest wording that won't trigger escalation. I do what I can from inside. Quiet edits. Soft warnings slipped into briefings. A sentence here. A pause there. The rules are still passed. Just slower. More carefully. I still keep the notebook. Some nights, when the house is quiet and Marisol and Elena are asleep upstairs, I read it and feel the weight of every name. Mason. Jenna. Annie's nephew. The bus driver who never got to clock out. Isaac. Names that never made it into any official accounting. The voices still try. They don't knock anymore. They text. They email. Once, a perfectly formatted interoffice memo appeared in my inbox asking me to authorize a flight into Kuyarak for environmental assessment. I deleted it without opening. Rule 19. If it looks routine, it isn't. The spread hasn't stopped. I've seen the reports from other states. Different terrain. Same behaviors. Rangers hearing lost hikers call their names from closed trails. Dispatchers receiving calls from phones that burned in wildfires years earlier. Different accents. Same patients. That's the mythic part people struggle with. They want a monster. A shape. Something you can point at and say there. This isn't that. It's older than our systems and smart enough to wear them. Some elders told me it's not a single thing. It's a pattern that wakes up wherever humans build rules and then trust them more than their instincts. I don't know if that's true. I know this. It remembers me. Every so often, when I'm driving alone, the radio will click once and my own voice will say, very softly, "You forgot one." I pull over when that happens. I sit. I don't answer. I wait for it to get bored. So far, that's been enough. But I'm tired. Enforcement fatigue is real. You can't live your entire life braced against instinct. You can't refuse every call forever. Someone eventually answers because they're human, because compassion is reflex, because duty doesn't come with an off switch. That's how it wins. Not all at once. One good person at a time. I'm telling you this now because the rules only work if someone hears them before they're needed. Because once the voice sounds like someone you love, it's already too late to invent boundaries. Remember these, if nothing else. If a voice calls your name from somewhere it shouldn't, don't answer. If technology behaves perfectly in the wilderness, assume it's lying. If a call asks you to move quickly, stop instead. Never follow voices into fog, trees, or darkness. Never trust authority that can't be verified twice. And if you hear a child crying where no child should be, leave immediately. The rules don't save everyone. They never have. They just buy time. And time is what it feeds on. I don't know where you live. I don't know what systems you trust. But if you spend enough time alone, or if you work somewhere rules exist to keep people safe, understand this. Something listens. Something learns. And eventually, someone breaks. If you ever hear a voice that knows too much, that sounds too right, that asks you a question it shouldn't be able to ask, remember that this warning reached you after containment already started failing. I'm still here. For now. But the rules are heavier every year. And one day, someone will answer when they shouldn't.